The 1920s was a cultural revolution for the African American community. Literature, poetry, art, and music were just some of the influential mediums used. Of those, art was one of the most important. The art during the Harlem Renaissance promoted African Americans to embrace their identity and culture. The goal of visual artists was to gain control of their identities from white caricature. Artists such as Aaron Douglas, Hayden Palmer, and Jacob Lawrence helped aid the transition from traditional styles during the time. After the contribution of these artists, among many more, people began to change their minds, accepting African American contributions to society and their individuality.
Jacob Lawrence was another prominent Harlem Renaissance artist that brought light to many important social issues that affected African Americans at this time. One of his works that influenced many was a series called the Migration Series. The collection consisted of a total of 60 paintings, each containing a one-sentence caption narrating the story. In the first half of the series, Lawrence focuses on the discrimination and violence many African Americans were forced to endure in the South. This prejudice and violence led many to begin migrating north in search for a better life. The images depicted by Lawrence clearly show why many of them chose to leave. Later in the series, Lawrence depicts how life was like after migrating north for many African Americans. Lawrence showed that African Americans in the North had better living conditions and better opportunities for education. However, he also showed how many African Americans still face discrimination in the North. Lawrence concludes his series with the line, "And the migrants just keep coming." Just as many artists during the Harlem Renaissance, Lawrence focused on expressing his culture and identity, as well as the culture of many African Americans like him. He focused on telling a story about an important event in African American history that has shaped his culture and the rest of America forever.
Artists during the Harlem Renaissance often focused on changing the perspective used to view African American culture. An example of this is Palmer Hayden's piece, The Janitor Who Paints. According to Naomi Bloomberg, Hayden used his platform as an artist in the 30s to call attention to aspects of his culture that often went unnoticed. The subject of the painting is his friend Cloyd Boykin, an artist who was only ever seen as a janitor. The purpose of the painting was to show the expansion of self-expression during the Harlem Renaissance. The original painting was met with harsh criticism for being overtly racist. It contained caricature-like portrayals of the people that followed the way they were often painted by white people at the time. He redid the painting either to appease the critics or to possibly show an expansion of the perspective taken on African Americans. According to Britannica, artists during the Harlem Renaissance began to develop new styles that reflected traditional African art, rather than following white standards. Other artists focused on themes closer to the African American experience in America. They focused on subjects relating to racism, pride, and spirituality. Whether it was by creating controversial works or changing up the traditional style and themes of visual artworks, artists during the Harlem Renaissance used their influence to encourage people to embrace African culture and identity.
The Harlem Renaissance era forced people to understand the economical issues happening around the world and in their own communities. Art that came out of the Harlem Renaissance was a unique way of self-expression without saying a word. Aaron Douglas shaped Harlem art, nicknamed Father of Black American Art. Douglas's style of art mixed with both African art and modernism. The unique artistic style Douglas attained created many strong images of everyday life for African Americans during the 1920s. Artists today frequently include Douglas's techniques in their art. Art, such as aspects of a Negro life, was known for giving the public an insight to his mind and African American culture. Many articles, for instance, Aaron Douglas, major artist of the Harlem Renaissance, claim that Douglas played a huge role in shaping art during the 1920s and 30s. Therefore, art such as Aaron Douglas's not only contributed heavily to the Harlem Renaissance, but also to modern art today.
After the Harlem Renaissance, African Americans embracing self-expression, culture, and social issues became more of a social norm. The Harlem Renaissance marked one step closer to equality for our nation. However, much still remains to be done.